Hello. Today I want to talk about plot armor. So plot armor, I'm just going to really quickly list off what plot armor is not. Plot armor is not the same as genre armor. So genre armor is wherein basically nothing bad can happen to any of the characters because it doesn't match with the tone of the genre in general. So like if you're looking at Looney Tunes cartoons, for example, that has genre armor because Bugs Bunny's not actually going to kill a guy, for example. And like that's a very specific thing. And Overly Sarcastic Productions actually has a whole video on genre armor that I think covers the topic quite well in quite a concise way. So if that's something that interests you, do go and check that out. I don't know these people. I just think it's a good video. But what I want to talk about specifically today is plot armor, and more specifically how, like, what it is, but also how to avoid it potentially, or like ways you can look into avoiding it. So plot armor specifically, separate from genre armor, is when your character cannot be damaged, destroyed, or deaded by killed. It just wanted the alliteration. Or killed inside the narrative because you need them for the story to come to its conclusion. And sometimes that is dictated by genre conventions. So like in a romance novel, for example, something that is actively intentionally written to be a romance novel and shelved with the romance novels on purpose cannot, for example, have either of the love interests die, because a convention of the genre of romance is to have a happily ever after or happily for now ending, and therefore death of a protagonist kind of flies in the face of that. However, that is still not a genre armor, which is why I wanted to specifically mention genre armor separately, because it is a genre convention, but it's because the dictated plot ending of a romance novel is that they end up together. And if they don't end up together, it becomes not a romance novel. I know there's been a lot of discussion about novels that don't quite fit into the romance genre expectations of a happily ever after or happily for now lately. But those aren't, I hate to break it to you, but according to actual literary genre conventions, those are not romance novels. They are women's lit, which is a hell of a name for a category, isn't it? But it is what it is, and that's what it's shelved as, and that is a separate thing from romance. So there are other ways that plot armor exists, and we'll get into those a little bit more. But basically, I also want to mention that the big glaring fault with plot armor in general isn't so much that you, the writer, if you are a writer, maybe you're a reader who's just interested, isn't so much that I, the writer, or potentially you, the writer, are here thinking, oh no, I know that my protagonist has to get to the end of the book because otherwise the book ends with the protagonist. That's not the problem. Like, there is definitely plot armor going on for your characters at some point, like if you're taking this really, really literally. But the real problem that comes from plot armor and the way that it's generally talked about is in reader perception of plot armor. So if your reader's looking at stuff that happens to your protagonist or any of your other characters and going, this is starting to damage my suspension of disbelief, that maybe not thinking it exactly like that, but that's sort of the concept of what's happening. This is starting to press against my suspension of disbelief into I can't choose to disbelieve anymore. So voluntary suspension of disbelief is something I've talked about before. But voluntary suspension of disbelief, very, very briefly, is that the reader, when they pick up a book, especially like a fantasy or sci-fi book, they're willing to suspend their disbelief on purpose, by choice, to buy into the universe that you have created as an author and buy into the story, no matter how fantastical, right? But at some point, you may come up against that voluntary suspension of disbelief. And it is different for every person. Like, no two people have the same limit of voluntary suspension of disbelief. Like, for example, I've actually got a great example of this. For example, if there is ever an archaeologist in any piece of fiction ever, I have a hair in my collar. If there is ever an archaeologist in any piece of fiction, ever, My wife, who has been a commercial field archaeologist and has also been a research academic archaeologist. She's done both of these kinds of archaeological digs. She's studied archaeology. She's got a master's degree in archaeology. If there is ever an archaeologist who does not behave in the way that an actual archaeologist would or does, and does not do the things that an actual archaeologist would do or has done, even if it's like bad historical archaeology, because you have to study that when you're studying archaeology, my wife cannot suspend her disbelief anymore. And I'm sure that loads of other people have that about their industry of expertise as well. Like, maybe you're a builder, I don't know. Maybe you're a builder and someone's not doing something after building code and you're there like, well, that would never happen. And it breaks your suspension of disbelief. That is the same concept with Plot Armour, is how much do your readers believe someone could survive? How convincing are you about the fact that someone could survive this and continue to go on? So, like, some of it is characters coming out of dangerous situations completely unscathed, with no lingering damage, no lingering faults. And, like, even without... We're taking magical healing off the table for right now. We'll talk about that in a minute, but basically, I was watching something the other day. This is why it came to mind. I blasted through something in an entire weekend. I say entire weekend. I blasted through something in a Saturday afternoon because series have 8 episodes now. More episodes. And I very much had the limit of my suspension of disbelief broken several times over. And the only reason that I finished the thing is because it's something it's a series, wider media thing that I care about. And like, I've watched some really bad stuff from this particular title. I've watched some really bad stuff from this particular title. That it has a history of bad series, movies, visual media like that. Non-interactive visual media. It has a history of really bad ones of those. And like, most of the time, even if they're bad, they're still quite fun. And that's part of the joy, right? But in this particular case, while it was fun and there were a lot of Easter eggs in it, I'm so glad my wife loves me, because otherwise I think anyone else would have been very annoyed by that's a reference to this. There's an Easter egg here for that. That's a reference to this. Oh my gosh, I didn't think they would bring up that fact. She's wearing her hair in plaits because she does that in one of the video games. You know, normal stuff that normal people know about their favourite things. But I hit about the halfway mark. I think it was episode 5 of 8. And I was just like, why this? Why this situation? Why this person in this capacity, in this format that she's in now? Why is it that she can just get up and go when other people are struggling? Why is she able to break out of the mind control when other people can't break out of the mind control? Why is she so special other than like protagonist powers? And therein brings the conversation about plot armor, because the reason that she can get out of the mind control is because she needs to for the plot. And the reason that she's not really hurt by this and she can keep going is because she needs to for the plot. And the reason that all of these other things that I was like, this just doesn't feel like it makes sense, was because plot. That's why. And it's like, I'm not saying you can never have characters do stuff because plot reasons. That is part of being a writer. That's part of creating work like that. And I don't think it's bad to sometimes have characters do things that you sort of initially think, right, I don't think my character would do this, but they need to for the plot. Because all you then have to do as a writer is go, okay, what makes them do this for the plot? Like, under what circumstances would this be the course of action that they take? Like, for example, Mary, in the second Guardian Cadet series book, in the end of the second Guardian Cadet series book, Mary makes a choice, a bad choice. Mary makes a lot of bad choices. We love her. Mary makes a horrible choice. She makes a really bad choice. But it's the only choice she can really figure out how to do. Like, all of the other choices that are technically available to her, she's looked at them and she's gone, right, this is dangerous. This is a bad choice. This would hurt me more than I'm willing to be hurt. This would hurt my friends more than I'm willing to hurt them. This would set the world into chaos. I'm not going to do that. And she makes a choice that is internally consistent, even though at the beginning of the book, it's literally the exact opposite of any choice. She's like, at the beginning of the book, she would do literally anything not to make that choice. But over the course of the book, events transpire in such a way that suddenly that becomes the logical option for her to take and an internally consistent choice for her to make. And that is what you, the author, if you are the author, that is what the author's job is to do, is to figure out how to mitigate that plot armor and how to make it make sense. And if you haven't done that, that's on you. No. Well, it is, but the point is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to make everything internally consistent, and you're trying to make everything, every piece of plot armor that you have to pack onto your protagonist, trying to make it invisible, right? You want that plot armor to not exist to the eye of the reader, even though you as the author might know it's there. So, for example, the ways to mitigate it, particularly in the case of damage or mind control, because these are the two things that are on my mind. And also I think they're two of the things that pop up a lot. So why can your protagonist break out of mind control? And the way to solve that particular problem, why can your protagonist do it when nobody else can, is literally to give them a piece of knowledge in advance, right? Or to have this specific moment. I'm actually going to use an example. So in Dragon Age Origins, 2008 maybe? I don't know. In Dragon Age Origins, you get kidnapped by a sloth demon. Just stick with me here. In Dragon Age Origins, you get kidnapped by a sloth demon, you get taken to the place called the Fade, which is where magic exists, basically. It's simplicity's sake. If you've played the Dragon Age games, you understand. If you haven't played the Dragon Age games, I hope this makes enough sense. Basically, the home of dreaming and magic is where you get kidnapped to by this sloth demon, and it's where the demons generally live, right? And you, as the protagonist, get put into a idealized version of the beginning of the game, because it's something that every single one of you has been through. You get put into the idealized version of this. You join the Grey Wardens at the beginning of the game. That's like a big plot point thing. And you get put into an idealized version of that, and the mentor that's supposed to be around for you. None of this is spoilers, and also the game's really old, so suck it up, buttercup. But like, the mentor that's supposed to have been teaching you but ended up dying right at the beginning of the game is still around, and he's talking about how you've done a great job. He's like, come back to life. Or he never really died, is the concept that's being peddled to you. And then you, as the protagonist, get to ask some questions, and it relates to the things that you've already learned over the course of the game. And you get to wake yourself up out of this mind control fade dream thing that you've been put in, where basically the point of it is that you're supposed to live out the rest of your days in that situation, managed by a lower level demon, so the sloth demon can eat your body while you're dreaming. And the inside demon can eat your upset or your desires or your whatever. There's lots of different demons. It's not important. But when it comes to you breaking out, it's because it goes against the things that you've just done previously in the game. So contextually, your character can break out of it, not because you, the player, are special, even though obviously that's why. It's not internally because you, the player, are special and you have to be able to break out of this to be able to continue the plot. It's because your character is looking at the situation in front of you and going, that doesn't match the situation I know to be real. That doesn't match the situation I came to this with. And then you have to go and rescue your companions, right? And like one of your companions, the only one I can actually, no, there's two that I can remember. So we'll just use those two because I can't remember anyone else's. But one of them's basically got the thing where in their fade dream that's been created for them, what their desire is that they want is to retire happily to a little farm in the middle of nowhere with a dog and a wife and maybe some kids, I don't know, something like that. The idyllic countryside life situation with a dog specifically, that's important. And when you go to rescue this person, again, the only way to break them out of this belief system, because their belief is that, okay, but we won the war and now I get to retire and be happy. The only way to break them out of that is by convincing them that they haven't won yet. And the way to do that is the exact same way that you broke out. You ask them questions like, hey, which one of us did the deed and killed the archdemon? Well, I don't remember. Exactly. You don't remember because we haven't done it yet. Oh no, break the dream. And then again, the same with another companion who is an assassin, a trained assassin. And he believes that he has been taken back by his assassin's troop. He's basically run away from them. It's not important. And he believes he's been taken back by them and he's going through retraining, which is exactly what would happen if he got taken back by them. So he believes that that's what's happened. And then you're there like, hello, this isn't real. And he's like, no, it is. I know it's real. Like, maybe you came to rescue me, but that was a stupid idea. And then you're like, okay, how do I convince him? And you start asking him questions. And that's how you break all of them out, is you basically ask them a lot of questions in the same way that you asked a lot of questions at the beginning of it. And so the internal consistency for that makes so much sense, right? I'm so distracted because I've just realised what I can see in my glasses is the phone screen. So I'm sorry about that. If that's distracting to you also. Anyway, or it will be now. Anyway. So internal consistency is really important, but also like providing your protagonist with some kind of reasoning. Like maybe they are like that asshole who questions everything all of the time. Then obviously breaking out of mind control through questioning makes a lot of sense. If they're not that kind of person, but they've got a really strong sense of will, as long as you've pre-established it before the point that they break out of mind control, that's fine too. But you have to make sure that whatever it is that's the foundation of them being able to do the breaking out of mind control, or whatever situation like mind control they're in, is internally consistent. You have to make sure that that piece of plot armor is basically, it's the thing of that's the one piece that has to be really visible in advance. Like, and not as a piece of plot armor, but as a piece of like regular armor, like something that already exists within the character that allows them to then be this very strong-willed individual who can break out of mind control or resist mind control or whatever. And like having a goddess drop down from the heavens in the very beginning of a franchise game or TV series doesn't actually make sense and isn't internally consistent with not only what exists within this particular iteration, but also not consistent with what exists in any of the other iterations of the games or movies or TV series that exist within this wider scope of stuff, right? And that's the really annoying part, is that with this particular thing that I watched, there is a deity, a goddess that exists, fine, that's internally consistent with the wider scope of the stuff, but the fact that she comes to visit the main character right at the beginning doesn't make sense, because in every other thing you have to get to at least 50 to 75% of the way through before the supernatural stuff pops up, right? When you're playing the first game, you are doing traps and puzzles, you are fighting wildlife, you are fighting people trying to do the thing that you're trying to do, and then you get to about the 50% mark and you run into a dinosaur and you're like, a dinosaur? What is happening? And then everything gets a bit more supernatural from that point onwards. But it's buried in pockets of the world that you exist within as a player or as the non-player main character in other formats that aren't games. And, like, again, I'm not against the idea of that happening. It's just very surprising that it happened so early. And it feels like visible plot armor to just have this one character for no reason. Like, why was the character visited by the goddess? Therein lies the question. Why was she visited by this goddess in the beginning? What is the connection there? Why would the goddess come and visit her, this particular goddess, come and visit her? Like, for what reason? And it's before she interacts with the stuff to do with the deity as well. So again, it's that thing of like, is she being summoned? What's happening? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, so that's how mind control works. When it comes to being injured, here's another one. This is a big one. This is a much bigger one. I've spent a lot of time on mind control, I apologise. But this is a much bigger one. The injury one is much simpler also, to be fair. When it comes to injuring your characters, I advise looking up the injury, because you need to know how long it takes to heal from that. You need to know what it prevents you from doing. You need to know how it would impact a person, how you're supposed to deal with it, how you're supposed to heal from it, how long it takes, what are the recovery steps. These are all things that are vital to know about any injury you put on your character. And ultimately, not just any injury, but any situation that could cause injury or likely would cause injury. Have they fallen from a great height? Okay, great. Wonderful. We love falling from a great height. If they fall from a great height, what's likely to hurt afterwards? Well, it depends how they landed. Okay, cool. Maybe they're a really practiced lander and they've just ended up with some bruises. Maybe they've popped a shoulder out of socket. Shoulders out of socket are surprisingly decent to like pop back in if you can do a good job of it. It's quite difficult if you don't know what you're doing, and it's quite difficult if you don't have extra stretchy joints like me. But it's a fun one to have, right? Because ultimately, once you've popped the shoulder back in, you're not supposed to use it for anything, but you kind of can. If you're in a life or death situation and your shoulder's just been put back into socket, you are more likely, basically, once you've dislocated something once, in the following 48 hours, up to 6 weeks, but 48 hours, you're very likely to dislocate it again. And that's why your joints swell in that kind of a situation, is to try and prevent that from happening, right? That's a big part of the point of swelling, is to cushion you and smush it together so that that doesn't happen again. Your body's very clever. But yeah, so the likelihood of dislocating it again in the subsequent quite short period of time is higher. But you shouldn't use it. You should rest it, gentle motion, all of that jazz. I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm not a medical professional. Please do not take this medical advice. But if your character was going to then have to climb out of a pit, despite the fact that they've just popped their shoulder back into joint, and that's the only way to get out of this situation, I mean, you would, wouldn't you? You'd agonize about the fact that your shoulder's in so much pain. Oh my God, this hurts so bad. But you would still do it, right? We have record of people walking on broken legs. We have record of people doing all sorts of wild, unbelievable stuff because the adrenaline is a hell of a drug, and because they were in a life or death situation, and the desire to survive is very, very strong. And unfortunately, you can't really use much of that for your character. Like, you can put them in situations, but you have to make, like, situations where they're having to walk on a broken leg, or they're having to, like, do stuff even though it hurts. But, like, if you break their ribs, they can't reach upwards. You literally can't. If you break your arm laterally, you literally can't lift it. Like, trust me on this. I have done that one. I've never broken a rib, but I have broken my arm across here, literally. 2 pieces of bone, sorry. But that's what happened, and it was really neat. I would love to show you the x-rays, but I don't have them anymore. And I literally could not lift my arm because, well, my bone wasn't connected to itself. I'm sorry if this is squicky. I could do everything I wanted from the elbow down, but here wouldn't move. I couldn't have pulled myself out of the pit with that. No chance. Because I literally couldn't lift my arm. Like, I could have done and real climbing, but that would have been it. So it would have been a real climb. Like, if I had to climb a ladder, for example, because that's the best example I have, because it's nice, even rungs, I would be able to hold a rung here, reach with that one and then push up with my legs, because that's what you do on a ladder, I assume. Other people also do this. And then I would have had to grab here again, and that would have been the only way I would have been able to do it. And that is the kind of thing that makes your audience not see the plot armor. Your character is climbing out of a pit by ladder. And their injuries are playing on them. This is the big thing. Continuing to have the injury after the injuring situation has occurred. But also, like, injuries will compound on one another. If you are hurt and you get more hurt, surprisingly enough, you will hurt more. And if your characters aren't hurting more, then it starts to look like plot armor. So again, to use this example of this thing, again, it's a wider thing that I really love. But this particular one hit a lot of my annoying buttons. Ayla. It did. It hit a lot of my annoying buttons, this specific iteration. Hi, kitten. Hi, Porthos. They're having a conference about the rain, apparently. Anyway, it hit a lot of my wider buttons because this character got hurt a lot, but then didn't seem to have any lingering hurt. Could you leave my tripod? Kitten. So it didn't seem to have any lingering hurt, didn't seem to be injured by the situations. Like at one point, she got grazed by a bullet, and then she just started on the arm specifically, and then she just started climbing like it was no big deal. And it's like, how serious is that graze? How deep is that graze? How much of you did you get damaged? Like, is it just a surface level wound? And we couldn't tell based on the aesthetic. But like, is it just a surface level wound, or is it something deeper and more impactful? At one point she falls off a big building and then she just gets up and carries on. And it's like, are you not hurt? Are you not a little bit hurt? At one point she jumps out of a moving train and then she just gets up and carries on. And I'm like, at this point, you are injured. You have to be injured. There's no way that you're not injured from these situations that you keep putting yourself in. And because it's not a video game where the suspension of disbelief about injuries is higher, because generally speaking, by and large, in a lot of video games, your health respawns over time, even though it's based on a video game franchise, it became unbelievable. And therefore, these two factors of plot armor compounded upon themselves to make it a less interesting story. And therein lies another piece of the puzzle and the problem, is that when it comes to plot armor, it's very easy to give it to your character because you feel like it's increasing the stakes. It's very easy to put them in another dangerous, deadly situation, another dangerous, deadly situation, another dangerous, deadly situation. Get them hurt, get them hurt, get them hurt. And then they walk away kind of fine because they need to be able to do the next dangerous, deadly situation. And like, I see it a lot where characters will get into a fight and they'll be like, oh, my face bleeding, my eyes, my lips, my nose, I don't know, something. Maybe not eyes. Eyes generally don't. Oh, and my knuckles are so bruised. Oh, I can barely use my hands. And then like 2 days later, they're in another fight. And it's like, obviously, again, yes, adrenaline does impact. But after that second fight, they're like, oh, my nose, my mouth, my knuckles, I'm fine. And it's like, if you have repeatedly taken hits to the nose, you're really not fine. You can't really breathe. It's just an unpleasant situation. It happened to me once in martial arts training. I used to do that, not anymore. But like, when it comes to being hit in the face, it's really awful. It's a really awful situation being hit in the face. And we weren't supposed to do it to each other. It was very much an accident. I've also been accidentally hit in the face when I was doing stage stuff, where I was doing backstage work and somebody moved around too fast with like a thing and that was unpleasant. But yeah, it's just one of those things that happens, and therefore I have experience with it, and therefore I can tell you, your eyes are going to water and your brain is going to shut down for a second. Like, your brain is just going to immediately focus all attention on the fact that you've just been hit in the face, and all you can think about is the fact that you've just been hit in the face. It's why it's such a great self-defense move, and why you shouldn't do it to people. for funsies or whatever, is because it is so like overwhelming. Your brain literally just focuses in on my face for quite a long time. Like, it's not actually a long time, it feels internally like a very long time. And I'm not saying you have to put that into every situation where your character gets punched in the face, but be aware that that is a thing that exists, and anyone who's been punched in the face, intentionally or otherwise, is gonna know what that feels like. And that's a surprisingly common situation. Just like people and like, I'm not saying you have to speak to someone who's had every single injury your character's ever had, because again, not everybody recovers from stuff in the same way. I have extra stretchy joints, therefore when I dislocate something, I can kind of pop it back in and everything's kind of fine. I mean, I should go to A&E. I don't always, because my local A&E has a 48 to 52 hour wait time. So if you go in for something that is serious, like dislocating a joint is a serious endeavour, and you will be waiting because you're not having a heart attack or a stroke, which absolutely should get priority, or you're not bleeding from a head wound, or whatever, you don't get priority, obviously, and then you can be waiting for up to 52 hours. And it's like, at that point, I might as well just be at home, because all you're going to tell me is take some ibuprofen and, take some ibuprofen, which I can't even take anyway. Take some ibuprofen. I have specific painkillers from my GP for this exact stretch joint problem, but take some ibuprofen, rest it, gentle move it, and use either heat or ice, whichever one feels nicer. And that's the whole treatment plan, especially because with my joints, it's like they're extra stretchy anyway. So there's no damage there. They don't get damaged. They hurt because it's a bad thing and you shouldn't do it. They get overstretched, but there's no like snapping, there's no tearing, there's no real damage happening because I am extra stretchy. But that's not true for everyone. Please go to A&E if you dislocate something. Or the ER if you're in the US, and I don't know what it's called anywhere else. It's accident and emergency here. Actually, to be honest, if you have the opportunity to go to a minor injuries unit, if you dislocate something, please do that, because you'll get seen much faster, and it's not an emergency, it's a minor injury. Anyway, yeah, please don't take any of my statements as medical advice. Even if you have a hypermobility spectrum disorder, like I do, please don't take this as medical advice. I'm not giving medical advice, I'm giving writing advice. And even then, I'm not guaranteeing anything. But when it comes down to plot armor, making it as invisible as possible can look like a character being injured after the fact. It can look like them struggling with pain, and even if you have futuristic or magical healing abilities and healing situations, like, for example, in Guardian Cadet series, Mary goes to the magical healer repeatedly over the course of the books because she gets injured a lot. So, but even though that exists, I've tried to balance that out as not being a fix-all. It's a, hey, we've done what we can, here's what you have to do to facilitate the best possible healing. Like, if you've broken a bone, I think that does happen at one point. I don't know if it does or not. But if you've broken a bone, for example, in the healers, and you go to the healers, they can heal the bone back together, but it's still fragile for the next however long I decided to let that be fragile for. Like 2 weeks, 6 weeks, I don't remember. And like, that is a thing that happens. Like, there's still a recovery period attached to magical healing or futuristic healing potentially. And it allows that greater level of plausibility and within the reader, even if you're thinking, well, why wouldn't I just be able to magically heal it like that? And like, I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying it's easier for a reader to believe it if it takes a little bit of actual behind the scenes practice time. Even if it's like 48 hours, right? For the next 48 hours, let the magic settle around you. Don't cast any spells. Or for the next 48 hours, let the magic settle around you. Try not to get any fights. Try not to get in any fights for the next 48 hours. And even if they can't do it, like, knowing and being protective of, like, oh, I know I broke my ribs and I got them reset by a magical healer, for example. I've got to make sure that they don't touch my ribs even when I'm fighting, right? And then if it does happen, a worse injury occurring, because technically it's an injury on top of an injury, that's a way to allow, like, to make plot armor again more invisible. Like, your main character has to make it through. You know they're going to make it through the fight. To a certain extent, your reader knows they're going to make it through a fight. But it feels more real. The tension is there and the stakes are there because your character is aware of the things that have come before and aware of the things that might injure them in the future. They're aware of the ways that these things compound on each other. And I'm not saying they have to be really, like, thinky about it all of the time, but in brief moments and interludes, just bringing up casually, not casually, but, like, again, if you're in the fight for your life and last week you had broken ribs and they've been magically or futuristically healed since then, you would still probably have the conscious thing of, like, your brain wouldn't catch up with the fact that they're healed yet and would be there like, don't let them touch me, don't let them touch my ribs. And, like, that is a great way to allow for plot armor and to bring back to the fact that they've been in a fight recently. Like, oh my gosh, this is ramping up. Look at how many fights they're getting in. Look at how hurt they're getting. And even though the hurt got healed, they're still worried about it, right? They're worried about even potentially just having to go back to the magical healer and be there like, hey, so it happened again. And, like, mitigating plot armor can be as simple as that. It can be as simple as just making sure that you allow your character to be heard sometimes, to take time to heal, to have thoughts and feelings after the fact about what they've just been through. Like, even if they're a kind of character who shuts a lot of stuff down and doesn't want to think about it or feel about it, having them actively shut that thought process down, like having them be there, like, or like another character bringing it up to them and being there like, so are you okay? I'm fine. Just because I broke my ribs last week, it's not a big deal, okay? Or like, just because I dislocated my shoulder climbing out of that pit doesn't mean I need your help, okay? I'm fine. Okay, but, like, how do you feel about being hunted down for sport? That it is what it is, okay? Leave me alone. Like, they're allowed to be like that. I mean, my wife and I call me a big baby when it comes to being injured, because I get injured a lot because I have extra stretchy joints and these things happen. They pop themselves straight out of socket. It's really not a fun time. But we call me a big baby about it, not because I'm actually, like, writhing around on the floor crying, because it's been my whole life. I'm used to it. But because I don't want to talk about it, and so she'll be there like, I heard that noise. Was that your joints popping out of socket? Or I watched you do that movement. Is that you putting your joints back in socket? And I'll be there like, no, I'm fine. And she's like, are you being a big baby about it? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. And she's like, do you want a painkiller? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. And at that point, after 3 no, I'm fine, she's like, right, okay, so I was right about the very first piece of this. And I'm like, fair enough, you were. And then she's like, okay, should we actually take care of it? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. She's like, stop being a big baby. But that's what we mean when we call me a big baby about it. It's like, I just don't want to do anything about it. I just want to ignore it, pretend it didn't happen. And, like, having a character do that is completely fine, because you're also bringing it up from another character. You're still raising the fact that these injuries are happening. And somebody is noticing and caring about these things. Even if it's the case that, like, they keep going back to the same magical healer because it's the cheap one in the marketplace or whatever. And the magical healer's the one who's like, I have seen you 3 times this week. What are you doing? Are you in an underground fight pit? Are you being hunted for sport? What's going on here? And, like, especially even if it's like a healer who normally doesn't ask questions and that's why the character goes to them. You know, like, the point is that by making reference to the injuries that have come before, you, in a way that makes the character look more fragile, but not too fragile that therefore they wouldn't be able to handle the next set of injuries you're about to give them. You can mitigate that visibility of the plot armor. You can make it look less visible. You can make it more of a sheen on the front of the character rather than a full breastplate, you know? Like, that's the goal, is that even if your reader, or whatever, knows that this character isn't going to die, isn't going to have long-lasting injuries, isn't going to whatever, you can still create the tension by allowing them to be specifically injured, to be concerned about the state of their health. And especially if they haven't been before, or they've been less concerned about it before. Or like if they're brand new to this whole situation, which is a thing that characters are. Like, oh, I've never been in a fight before. And then they come out of the fight on top. They might get like a kind of almost a superiority complex about it. Like, oh, that was my first ever fight and I did such a good job. I'm never going to die. And like, even if that's what happens, it still mitigates that plot armor because the reader is looking at them going, you're such an idiot. And they forget that they're a character in a narrative that has to have them in it to be a narrative. And they start thinking about the character as a person. And that's sort of the goal, is the more of a person you can make the protagonist or whatever character is getting plot armored, the less plot armory they look. So make it internally consistent. And try to make sure that you have an element of internally consistent twice over. Make sure that it's internally consistent for the character and internally consistent for the world state that you've built them in. But also try and make sure that you have this acknowledgement, almost to the reader, that you see them getting injured, just like the reader does. And yes, we are all worried about it. And like, obviously don't put that in those exact words because that's going to look like plot armor. And it's going to look weird also. Read a book the other day that had a content warning halfway through. And it's like, could you put that at the beginning, please? Be much more useful at the beginning. Put it at the beginning. And if it is about a specific chapter, just put that it's about that chapter, surely. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I think that's the best choice. And like, even if you like put a little asterisk on the chapter and like you put in the content warning, will be marked with an asterisk or whatever. I don't know. But like, it was weird. It was very immersion breaking to get to that chapter and be like, there's a content warning here. I forgot I was in a narrative and now I've remembered. And it's like, I was deep into this book. And then it was like, nah, there's a content warning here. Oh, I'm reading a book. Maybe don't do that. But yeah, like, maintaining your consistency and sort of acknowledging to the reader within the context of the story that, yeah, we're all aware these injuries are bad. This character is not doing well. And the way that they're surviving is by. And if it's sheer force of will, make that make sense before the sheer force of will has to be the thing that keeps them going. Like, I'll admit, in another iteration of this thing that I watched on the weekend, I didn't like what they did to the character at all. And to be honest, that was probably a big part of why I didn't enjoy this one so much either. But like, one of the things they did to the character is they made her much softer. And the way that she got through the situation that she was put in over the course of the video game was, instead of being like, I'm confident and capable as a female character in a video game. I'm gonna have to fix that in a minute. Instead of it being, I'm confident and capable as a female character in a video game, which is always nice to see, they decided instead of that, she wasn't going to be confident or capable, but she was going to hold on to her friendships, and that was how she got through it. And it's like, power of friendship as a female storytelling device is probably something I should talk about at some point. It did not make sense for this franchise at all. But hey ho, it is what it is. Clearly my pets are causing trouble, so I am going to end this here. If you would like to check out my books, or support me monetarily, all the links you need are in the description box below, including links to my free short stories if you want to check those out. I share them every single week on Thursdays. I will see you in 2 weeks' time. And of course, there is always the like and subscribe buttons if you feel like sticking around. Bye!